but it's this idea that everyone's a mirror. Everyone is a mirror reflecting back at you all the stuff about yourself that you either like or dislike or reject within yourself, whatever it might be. So if you're feeling a certain way, if you've said something, Giles, for example, that's really like pissed me off or upset me or something, it's like you're just a mirror that's reflecting back at me the stuff, my insecurities, or the stuff that I haven't healed from childhood, or stuff that I actually don't like about myself that you're kind of drawing my attention to. So there's something that I've noticed recently which has been really fascinating me. You know how I feel about social media, people getting really angry about stuff that doesn't really matter.
I get fascinated by anger.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's happened a couple of times with this pod, I've noticed, and there's been like a couple of topics that have clearly been very triggering for people. And I know that the word trigger is a bit of a like fad at the moment. Everyone's like, oh, you're triggering me, I feel really triggered. Kind of what that means is like you're feeling some kind of emotional response to something, right? But it's fascinating to me what draws that out in people, and the podcast episodes in particular that I've noticed have been about quite polarizing topics, like the conspiracy theory episode that we did with Dom Jolly. That had some really aggressive responses from people.
And actually more than I thought there'd be a few, but actually it was quite an outpouring of like kind of, criticism, I guess.
Right. And at the time, I didn't think that we were recording anything particularly like polarized. He was talking about conspiracy theories that I probably would have thought was quite funny before the episode aired, but apparently some people really took umbrage to that. Another one recently was there was one about, I just made an offhand comment about like being a woman and how the inequalities between men and women, which, to be honest with you, I don't ever think about. It doesn't affect my life. It's not really something I'm that bothered about or care about that much, but I kind of made the comment.
Subject.
It's an important subject
about,
and it's a valid subject, but it's just a comment that I made and posted a video about it, and it's like all these men, obviously, men, just like clearly triggered by this. And there's been a few others, like talking about money as well. That was a very polarizing one. And so that as a concept really fascinates me, because it makes me think, like, what is it that's making people feel this way about certain things? And what is it that's then sort of compelling them to then feel like they have to have this huge response, like messaging people, commenting, leaving angry messages, and just suddenly becoming this very unpleasant person, whereas if you were having a conversation in real life, maybe the reaction might be a bit more nuanced.
Well, I think you've hit the nail on the head at the end there by saying, if you were having this conversation in real life, would you be in a conversation saying, oh, you've just triggered me? It probably wouldn't happen as much. I mean, it might happen in certain circumstances or certain situations. I've never been in a conversation with someone in the real world as such, and they've said, oh, that's really triggered me what you've just said. Whereas online, obviously, it's much more prominent, and maybe the whole concept around triggering has occurred with social media, and the feeling, or not the feeling, but the justification for responding to stuff,
right? In quite an aggressive or
in an aggressive way. Again, you wouldn't be as visceral maybe in real life. There's and we've talked before about like the lack of nuance in in social media and the discussions that happen on social media. You're either on one side of the discussion or the other, and but the word triggering feels like it's maybe come into being via the internet somehow.
Yeah, totally. And it's interesting, and by the way, when I'm talking about people having these responses, I'm including myself because even though I personally don't comment nasty things and write stuff on people's walls and stuff, I still have those responses as well. Like when I see something or someone's posted something or they've said something online, it literally physically affects you, right? Like you feel your heart's racing, you feel really angry or upset or whatever it is.
So funny enough, we talked the other day about we were having a discussion with some other people, and we were talking about the fact that, you're quite a carefree kind of person. Like, we joked about you not giving a shit about stuff.
Yeah.
But clearly there are things that trigger you.
Yeah.
So are you happy to sort of say what those things might be? What would be a kind of typical subject matter that you would see? And I'm assuming this is going to be on the internet as opposed to, it might be in real life as well. But what would be a triggering topic for you?
A topic might be animal cruelty, for example. Like if I were to see a picture of someone that's shot and killed a wild animal online, that would be something that would really like get my heart racing. And I've noticed as well that like when I have that physiological response, the hairs on my head stand up. Like I get a tingling feeling on my scalp, which is really weird because it's kind of like such a specific physical response or side effect or symptom, you might call it, of stress and anger, and like it's basically like my nervous system is kicking in, which is what being quote unquote triggered is your nervous system.
Yeah, triggering the nervous system.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a dysregulated nervous system all of a sudden.
So for you, it's hairs on your back of your head, like heart race thing,
racing heart,
and then just I guess a general feeling of anxiety or
not anxiety
or that kind of anger. I mean, you talked about anger perhaps maybe.
It's like a rise of energy,
yeah,
which makes you want to do something, and I think most people act on that, and that's when they start, you know, putting nasty comments and stuff, which, you know, if you see a picture of someone that's killed an animal and posted it online, yeah, fair enough. You know, feel free to do that. I personally don't, but I think we need people to shout out about stuff like that.
I think in the past I've shared stuff on Twitter actually, like, you know, look at this dickhead who's just, you know, slaughtered this beautiful animal and is posing with it. You know, that is a very triggering subject for a lot of people, even if you're not like as in, you know, as into wildlife and stuff as maybe you are as a conservationist and a wildlife artist. That still is triggering, and it promotes that response, and I have responded in those instances with that. And politics is another big one for me, like when I see sort of injustice and stuff like that. And I guess that's it's maybe injustice is probably the thing that a lot of people end up being triggered by in some way, whether it's injustice for whatever cause they might be behind, you know, whether it's injustice because you think there's too much wokeness in the world, or injustice for there being not enough wokeness, whatever it might be. I think maybe it's the injustice of things that maybe is a big triggering thing for subject.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, injustices.
Yeah, I don't know what the plural is. But
Unfairness. Yeah, it's for sure that is going to be something that's quite triggering for people. And also, it might not be, you know, like a genuine reason to be upset. It could be something within yourself. Like, for example, I get really infuriated when I come across people that might remind me of a certain parent or a caregiver or a teacher or someone that maybe wasn't that nice or was controlling or was aggressive or whatever it is. If I then come across someone that sort of reflects that in someone else as an adult, that triggers me to the point where I have to remind myself, like, actually, this person's not really doing anything wrong. This is me. And I think this is where it's really, really important to reflect on why you're feeling a certain way and whether it's actually important to act on that or not. And like, just as an example, I always say this phrase, like it's become a bit of a catchphrase, and I didn't make it up. I think I listened to it on like a podcast or something probably, but it's this idea that everyone's a mirror. Everyone is a mirror reflecting back at you all the stuff about yourself that you either like or dislike or reject within yourself, whatever it might be. So if you're feeling a certain way, if you've said something, Giles, for example, that's really like pissed me off or upset me or something, it's like you're just a mirror that's reflecting back at me the stuff, my insecurities or the stuff that I haven't healed from childhood, or, you know, stuff that I actually don't like about myself that you're kind of drawing my attention to. And then as soon as you realize that you turn all your energy inward, it all becomes about you, and you're like, oh shit, yeah, maybe I do need to work on that. And then you don't like react really aggressively and immediately say or do something that you're going to regret.
It's so true. But I think a lot of people aren't as don't tend to self-reflect in those moments. It tends to be like they just see their own kind of selfish, or not selfish, but their own kind of way of thinking as being the right way. And that self-reflection is not always easy for people, is it?
No, I mean, it's not easy though, and again, like, I include myself in this as well. Like, it's actually hard to remember to do that, especially when you're in that moment where your heart's racing and you're like really feeling really emotional. And again, like for me, certain like family members, for example, or people in my life might suddenly trigger that within me, and it's really hard to sort of take a breath, take a step back and sort of reflect, what is this actually showing me about myself? And like, for example, the one about the video that we posted about like gender inequality, it's no secret this is like an age-old problem. It's, there is male and female inequality. I don't know what you want me to say. It just is. Obviously it's a hell of a lot better than it was, but it's still there. Unless you're a woman and you've lived that and experienced that and the rest of it, then you don't really have any right to comment on that. It's not like I have a right to comment on sort of like racial inequality and stuff like that, because I haven't experienced that. So it's interesting to me that people were getting so upset about that, because I was like, but why? Like, why? It's not I'm not personally attacking you because you're a man. I'm just talking about society and what the facts of society,
or what you've experienced.
What I've experienced.
So you've experienced that, and I think that's the thing as well. Like, often when people are outraged by something, it's like, have you lived that experience? Have you experienced what that person's experienced?
Right.
And I think that's what sometimes it boils down to, that actually being empathetic and having a bit of compassion.
Yeah.
And actually, if you really thought about it, you might not have that response to it.
Right.
Because what is the right of me as so, for example, a man who is berating you, commenting on gender inequality, when they are of the gender that's been, been benefiting from positions of power and wage and wealth and all that sort of thing for hundreds of years.
Yeah.
And so you don't have a leg to stand on, really, but yet you still get people that.
Yeah, and I guess it is probably because they feel like they're being personally attacked because they're a man.
Yeah.
It's like if a black person was saying, this is terrible, there's so much racial inequality, blah blah blah, and then I feel personally attacked because I'm a white person, and I'm like, whatever, like, that's not true. What, do you know what I mean? It's understandable, like, from a psychological perspective, but also my experience as a woman will be very different to another woman's experience, and again, like, it's so nuanced. Some women, like, for example, I've worked in the film industry, we were just talking about in a separate episode, where it's like 90, well, at the time it was like 90% men, and I probably could have counted the amount of women that worked on that film set, the film sets that I worked on my hands compared to the amount of men, whereas another woman might have worked in maybe a more feminine environment, like a primary school or something like that. So again, my experience is different to someone else's experience who is experiencing the same thing. It's very nuanced and everyone is different, but I think we tend to forget that when we turn a little bit more black and white when we're feeling that way and we're feeling triggered by something.
Yeah, and as we discussed, like, a diverse workplace or a diverse, whatever it might be, that diversity brings with it such an amazing experience for everybody. Like on a film set, like we talked about in that episode, meant that people were getting more out of it, like because of the different ways people look at things. So it's so important when those things. Now, we've gone off on lots of tangents in this episode, but for example, let's think about, like, if you are feeling triggered, you see something, it might be on a timeline or even in the real world, you're having a discussion with someone and you're feeling triggered. Obviously, you talked a bit about reflecting a little bit, maybe. What other things do you think we can be doing to kind of just take a step back a little bit in those moments and maybe not reach for the send button or the impulse to say something in those moments? What sort of things do you think would be good to do?
I mean, to be honest with you, I always try and catch myself the minute I get those telltale signs, whether it be like the racing heart or the rage or like the jittery feeling of like, I need to do something about this, I try and catch myself in that. And I think that's something, again, that we're not very good at, is listening to our bodies. You know, like we think about how what we're thinking, like what's going on in our head, but we're not really that great at actually like being too in tune with physically what's happening within the body. So I try and catch myself in that moment straight away and immediately try and turn it inwards. And even if it means saying in my head to myself, everyone's a mirror, everyone's a mirror. And I think like my friends are so sick of me saying that now. Like anytime my friend's moaning about someone, I'm like, oh, everyone's a mirror. But it's just from habit of telling that to myself. Because then it kind of forces you to be like, well, what is this person actually reflecting back at me? What is it that this person is showing me about myself? Because there will be a reason why you're feeling so triggered. Because actually, when it comes down to it, I've noticed, I have a little theory about this. When there is something that is so disconnected from your reality, but it's terrible, we don't have any physiological response. For example, if I hear about someone that's murdered someone, that is terrible. It's awful, and like I can empathize with the families and blah blah blah, but there's no part of me that feels triggered or like enraged or like I must do something about this man that's murdered, like this is so unfair and blah blah blah, because there's nothing within me there's no insecurities, there's no wounds, there's nothing within me that relates to that murderer at all, you know. Whereas there might be a really trivial thing, like I might see someone like, I don't know, steal something, and that might trigger me to an extreme where it's still an injustice, but there's something within me that relates to that person or feels personally attacked by that person or whatever it might be. So like everything is always about us, because we are quite, you know, we're selfish humans, aren't we really? That's my theory. And again, I'll probably trigger a bunch of people by saying that. Yeah. Fuck it.
And actually, also on the flip side, sometimes maybe it's good to be triggered. Maybe it does kickstart you into thinking about a bigger picture or something. Totally. Or, you know, a cause that you might suddenly think, do you know what, I want to do something about that.
Yeah,
and,
totally.
So although this has been a bit of an episode about how to sort of deal with our own physiological experiences around triggering, sometimes triggering is a good thing. Sometimes it might kickstart you into, a movement or, fighting an injustice. And that's not a bad thing. Or calling someone out, whatever it might be. You know, that there is always a flip side to these things. Yeah. So actually triggering can be a good thing.
Absolutely.
But also, just, again, take care of yourselves when you're in those moments and you're feeling particularly anxious, or it's having those physiological effects on you that are uncomfortable. That definitely can be a bit much sometimes.
Totally. And like you say, there's a time when actually speaking up and voicing your opinion in a compassionate but concise way, and not just becoming like a keyboard warrior, when that's really important. And then there's a time when it's not helpful and it's not useful, and actually it's just like making other people unhappy as well. But like you say, it's so important to have a bit of sort of like self-compassion and be kind to yourself when you're feeling like that, and don't beat yourself up, and don't feel guilty about it, because we're human and this is what we're here for, you know. So yeah.
Totally. And another thing it's always worth doing, I think, sometimes, if you're, you know, before hitting send, just give yourself like 30 seconds, a minute, just to reread that message if you're doing this online, and just give yourself that time to think, do I really want to send this?
So I do this, like, sometimes even just typing it out helps. But I do this that thing where sometimes if I want to say something or I want to write something, I imagine someone that I really respect reading it, like as a fly on the wall. Like, for example, you know, on Twitter you can actually sometimes see when it will say Giles Paley Phillips has commented on this post, and you'll see the comment. If I was scrolling down my timeline and I saw Giles Paley Phillips has commented on something, and it was this like aggressive, like trolly comment on someone's post, I'd be like, ugh, like what the hell's wrong with him? Like, he needs to take a chill pill. It wouldn't make me feel like I respect you much, to be honest with you. So sometimes I do that, where I'll type something out or I'll think it in my head, and then I'll think, imagine if, I don't know, trying to think of someone, that Mark Ruffalo.
Knew that was who you were going to say.
I know. Imagine if Mark Ruffalo read this. Is this the sort of person that I want him to see me as? Because I don't want to be that person. Do you know what I mean? Like, absolutely. That helps me. But,
okay, so just envision Mark Ruffalo's reading your posts, and then you might think twice about sending it.
Yeah, exactly. Or, you know, replace with a person, celebrity, whoever, actor, candlestick maker. Someone you respect.
Could be a friend, could be a family member.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Imagine your mum reading it.
Yeah.
because, you know, I think
and how disappointed she might be.
Or how proud they might be that you're sticking up for what you believe in and that you're handling it with grace and integrity and all the rest of it. So it doesn't always have to be neggy, but cool.